So,
Welcome you all to this Samvad Vemba series of Insol India. We welcome to all our panelists. Welcome our great moderator Anju, who has been a part of our newsletter. Alok is looking at all our financial problems, gives us guidance on everything that we ever need in insolvency or in bankruptcy. We have the honor to have Mr. Pant, who will tell us how we created that institute and what all contributions that under his leadership we did to the insolvency regime. Atul is another one who would tell you right from Ladakh till Kanyakumari of what is happening in the corporate world. The great RP that we have is Mr. Goel with us, who would tell us everything with respect to the details, of course, Anju will give you. But knowing personally all these people, it's an honor to have for Insol India to have such eminent panel to be on the webinar. We wish you all the luck and we're looking forward for a great session from you all. Thank you.
Sir, we are privileged, Chandyok sir, to have you as our leader. And it is only under your leadership that all of us, and I speak for everybody, that we are
I am actually feeling gay about your painting behind Atul. Alok. Yes, Anju, take over, please.
thank you so much, sir, for your encouraging words. Your words are always very encouraging and they are very helpful to us. So, good evening, everybody, Chandyok sir, dear panelists, and my virtual audience. I welcome you all to the 5th edition of Samvada web series of Insol India. It would have been my pleasure to have you all in person. Nonetheless, the show must go on. I think we should start the session virtually. So before I formally take up the topic, I hope that you all are safe and healthy and in a scary environment of pandemic, following the social distancing as much as possible. So Chandyok sir has already opened the floor or maybe inaugurated the session. I'm really thankful to him for the round of introduction for all of us as a president of Insol India himself. So I have a very esteemed panel today with us who do not need any introduction, I would say, but customary, I have to do it. So I will just take a view of the small introduction of everybody. Mr. Sunil Pant, the senior most panelist, is a retired senior banker who was CEO of the Indian Institute of Insolvency Professionals of ICAI, which is the IIIPI, till August 15th. So very recently he has been retired. He is currently an independent director with 4 companies of the Green Infra Group. He has a lot of exposure and held many high positions in different national and international bodies within and outside the ambit of banking. Highly qualified, he has attended many trainings at best known institutions of the world. A lawyer by profession, Mr. Vasant, practice area include dispute resolution, which is in the litigation and arbitration, aerospace, defense and aviation, infrastructure and urban development projects, energy and natural resources, insolvency and competition law. Vasant has been successfully representing many Fortune 100 companies and domestic clients in several high-stake arbitration proceedings before the High Courts and Supreme Court of India. He has been instrumental in drafting the RERA, which is the Real Estate Regulation and Development Bill 2012. Mr. Alok Dheer. Alok is the founder and managing partner of Dheer & Dheer Associates and is a CA and lawyer and has extensive experience of over 3 decades in corporate, commercial and civil law with special focus on corporate law and financial restructuring, insolvency laws, takeovers, M&A, banking law, real estate, PE, transactions, turning around of financially stressed entities in the country and issues related to asset reconstruction and securitization. He's also one of the first few insolvency professionals and founded IRR Insolvency Professional Private Limited, which is the first insolvency professional entity. He also promoted Alchemist Asset Reconstruction Company Limited, one of the first private sector ARCs licensed by RBI. He's been on many committees for development of IBC and has been recognized as a leading lawyer by many credit rating agencies in the field. Mr. Anil Goyal, a CA and IP by profession and an entrepreneur in nature, leading the largest indigenous IPE or insolvency practice in India as a founder partner and chairman of AAA Insolvency Professionals and LLP. He comes with 35 years of experience in various fields of auditing, debt syndication, stressed asset management, etc. He also has experience as resolution agent and enforcement agent under SARFAESI Act, have handled 17 assignments as RP, 10 assignments as liquidator, and has supervised 85 assignments under IBC where assets are attached by ED, PMLA, EOW, SEBI, CBI, RT department, local bodies, etc., etc. He has contributed to the profession of IBC by spreading knowledge and sharing his experience at many esteemed platforms and been on committees for the same. Mr. Atul Sharma is the managing partner of Link Legal India Law Services and has over 40 years of experience in his practice areas of project advisory, corporate litigation, mediations, arbitrations, including international commercial arbitrations. Mr. Sharma is considered as a deep thinker for his strategic abilities, being one of the industry leaders with deep knowledge. He has been invited to speak on many complex legal issues at national and international fora. Mr. Sharma is highly ranked and recommended by various directories and also features in the A-list lawyers of India Business Law Journal and recognized as a litigation star by Benchmark Litigation Asia Pacific 2020 and one of the India's top 15 dispute lawyers 2019 by Asian Legal Business. So our topic today is liquidation in COVID. We will do the discussion on the topic for final 45 minutes. And thereafter, we will take up the questions from the participants who can write their questions in the chat box. And I will go get those questions and we'll take them up after the discussion is over. So before I start with the topic itself for a moment, I would like to take all of you to pre-COVID liquidation scenario. Since the advent of IBC in December 2016, while liquidation happened in roughly about 60% cases came under IBC, whereas the spirit of the code was not the same. It was the resolution and not the recovery we all know. Then why it happened in the first place? So firstly, initially, those cases came under IBC, which were in stress from a long time. And either they were failed cases of various restructuring schemes or they were in BFIR already. Secondly, concept of matching resolution amount with liquidation value was a big hindrance on part of the COCs for passing resolution plans until recently when Honorable Supreme Court pronounced an order stating that these two have no real and effective relationship. Thirdly, in few cases, plans were duly approved and later resolution applicant went missing. So the forced liquidation happened in the want of suitable RAs. Last but not the least, lack of stress funding, especially in in the case of developing countries, also been a deterrent. So when circumstances were normal, so many liquidations were happening. Obviously, in a situation like this pandemic, what better could be expected? I would like to address our topic of the day in two parts. One is the impact of COVID resulting into more liquidations, and second is challenges faced by stakeholders in handling the liquidation process during COVID. I would like to take up the second part first and the first part later on. My first question would be to Anilji, as we all know that he has maximum experience as far as the liquidation of CIRP processes are concerned. So my first question to you, sir, is regarding the challenges faced by liquidators in regard to run the liquidation process, which is like pertaining to claims, their verification, and determining the liquidation estate, which is the foremost job of the liquidator. Also from the claimant's part for submitting their claims, because there were many, containment zones, there were many courier companies were not working. So the only possible way was the online submission of claims. So there were quite a deterrence, I think, on part of the submission of claims and verification of those claims. So I would take this up with you, sir.
Thank you, Anju. Thank you very much. I hope I'm audible because I'm not sure about my internet connection here. Yes. So Anju, I think this is a very, very simple question that you asked me. And I would like to first of all say, why so many liquidations under IBC? And I normally see in another scenario, I see that all these companies which have gone for liquidation were simply zombie companies. The companies were dead long back, and these companies were in fact dragged by the promoters for such a long period. So when this opportunity came with the lenders, with the creditors, they actually opted for the liquidation of the company. So before IBC, they had no option. See, look at a company called Visa Power. The project was never implemented. 30%, there was no investment made for the last 7 years. No worker was working. So 1,300 actual notice burst. So what was the options available with the creditors in the earlier laws? The company never started. So there was no option available. Now, thanks to IBC that there was an option available for the creditors that they could exit or they rather find whatever salvage is there. Otherwise, this could also have gone to the promoters because they had the possession. So see, once the possession is shifted to the creditors, that means whatever is available that actually would go to them. Otherwise, that would have also gone to the promoters or something would have been just been embezzled. So coming back to your question, Anju, is we are presently running 40 liquidation processes, and during COVID, everyone was working from home with internet connection and computers on their disposals. The claims were received. We only had one person at the office who were receiving anything which is coming physically. So the claims were being received, it was being analyzed, it was being verified, and even the communications were also being sent on email. As far as the courier service is concerned, most of the claims which are supposed to come electronically, there was no difficulty because otherwise also it would have come electronically. Only a very, very small portion of claims which can be submitted, let's say by workmen, that can be submitted by post or courier. Otherwise, everyone is supposed to submit their claims electronically. So for these claims, we had only one person. So there's one runner who had the license to run in the city. So it was actually being shifted to the, it was being scanned and it was being sent to the relevant human resource who would be verifying it. So we actually had zero difficulty in claim receiving, claim understanding and verification. And because the entire communication was going on, physical movement was restricted, but the one person who actually, that helped a lot. I believe every professional can do this. This is not something that we've done wonderfully, but this everyone can do that. So this claim part is 100%, it was done. So the other part that you probably said, the other movement, the only thing that we found difficulty was the valuation of the assets. The valuers, in fact, were not going to visit the assets personally because they definitely would go there. They would get in touch with others. They would physically examine the assets and then they would prepare the report. So we got most of the delay only because of the valuers were not able to go and reach to the respective sites. So this is shortly the question that you wanted to ask, Ravi, very briefly. I think you can go ahead with the other questions. Am I audible, Anju?
There was a lot of disturbance while you were talking, but I think we could take out like whatever was the essence in what you were saying. Yeah.
Okay.
Again, your screen is.
So I said.
Yeah.
Okay. So to me, it is working well. I could see everyone. I am able to hear you also. Anyone, I think you can continue with the other questions to other speakers. I answered, maybe some maybe have been heard.
Yeah. So yes. So thank you for your answer. Obviously, you have already taken up the valuation part, which was the actually second question. And in fact, I asked you about the liquidation estate, like so estimation of the liquidation estate. So we can go to the second question, which will include. I would like to ask this question from Alokji. When the so then the next question comes to the valuations of the corporate debtor, which Anilji also has touched upon. What is your experience in terms of valuations getting further diminished is one part, and having challenges in finding the bidders on and so on. And obviously he has also touched about another angle to getting the valuations done in, at all, if at all liquidator wants to get done. Although now if the valuations are good enough at the time of CIRP, which has been done, liquidator can use those valuations also. But yes, of course, if the liquidation is happening, say for example, after 1.5 year or 2 year, it always, I think, is better that liquidator is done, means does the evaluations again, because especially after this COVID, the valuations has, that's what my understanding, has gone down. So Alokji, your insight on that.
Thank you, Anju. And I think a very interesting perspective that has been given by Anil and yourself with respect to the liquidation in the post-COVID era, pre-COVID era and the post-COVID era. Just my 2 pence of perspectives on this issue. One important issue with respect to liquidation that has caused liquidations is the maturity of the CIRP process and the financial creditors. I have experienced that decision making in the financial creditors was always a problem, and in India it has always been a very serious issue, and that has led a lot of companies down the path. And even in the CIRP process, when the process started, the decision making of the financial creditors, because they don't want to decide, when they see that there is serious erosion of value, that decision making is not there. And if they do not take a pragmatic decision with respect to a CIRP process, then the liquidation process is bound to happen. The second issue which led to, if I may say, CIRP or insolvencies and bankruptcies, liquidation being a part of it, is the lending and the monitoring process of the financial creditors. Now, we have seen that in the past, the lending processes and the monitoring processes were weak, and that is why many of these companies have gone in for insolvency. The third issue perspective which I wanted to point out is that there is really no stigma to liquidation. There is this whole process which is going on, and there is this thinking has been, in fact, even the Honorable Supreme Court of India has been talking in terms of saying that the entire IBC, the purpose of the IBC is to revive companies, and the CIRP is given prominence. But the reality is that liquidation has no stigma. It is part of the process of the churn. It is the circle of rejuvenation. There is birth, death, and rebirth for companies. Therefore, we must look at liquidation as very much as a part of the process and not a part of IBC, which needs to be not given prominence. In fact, according to me, very pragmatic approach has to be taken, and the emphasis on resolution itself may not necessarily be good in the interest of the creditors. The creditors have to evaluate in a very robust manner and a very robust process as to what is there in their interest. And sometimes I would say, and I'm dealing with so many cases, you find companies which are having various assets in even different industries. They are so diversified. If you're putting everything together in one pool and insisting that somebody should take this asset alone, then you would find that the value will start decreasing. People do not want some part of the company. They don't want to pay value for it, and therefore they will attach a lower value to it. So overall value and maximization for the stakeholders will suffer. And therefore that process has to go on, and one has to evaluate, the COC has to evaluate very carefully as to what is in the best interest of the stakeholders, themselves and other stakeholders. Those are my 2 pence of perspectives on the first part. The second issue which you have told, which you've discussed, is with respect to the valuation of it. Now you are aware that in terms of the CIRP process, there is a valuation which is required. As you have very rightly said, the Supreme Court has clarified that the valuation in the liquidation valuation which is determined in the CIRP process has nothing whatsoever to do with the ultimate approval of the plan. So that problem which many financial creditors were facing, that they were not willing to approve resolution plans which were below the liquidation value, has now gone. However, this issue still remains in the minds of various people. You must also realize one thing. The best value determinant is the market. If you are bidding for a CIRP or inviting bids for CIRP process or for liquidation process, what a person is willing to pay is the real value of the asset. It is the real liquidation value of the asset, not the valuation which is determined by some professional. Professionals are professionals. With deep respect to all the professionals, they are not the people who are putting their money where their mouth is. So they are not the persons on the basis of valuation determined by them. The entire process must be held to, if I may use the word, ransom, because that's what is happening. If there is a valuation process, the financial creditors won't want to act, but none of the valuers are really putting money where their mouth is. And the person who has to actually put in the money has to see. And I have seen in various valuations which I have had, which I've examined over the process of the IBC, there are very significant nuances which are missed by the valuers. The encumbrances are sometimes ignored. The other defects of title, because they presume that this is an asset, possessions, encumbrances, title issues, locational issues, are many aspects which people have to evaluate when they are making bids. The second issue is that there is this issue of the valuation being conducted and whether the valuation should be conducted, whether it is even during the CIRP process. One of the issues which has been emerging is pre-COVID, the valuations were higher. COVID has been a game changer and has in fact impacted everybody in the industry. There is no doubt in my mind that even the potential acquirers, whether under the CIRP or under the liquidation, are looking at the valuations of the asset in the post-COVID era. Valuations have come down. In the CIRP, as you are aware, there is no process whatsoever of repeated valuations. You are taking the valuations as on the CIRP commencement date. In liquidation also, you are determining the value, and sometimes in some cases we have seen that some liquidators have taken the valuation which is at the CIRP stage, but the courts have come down heavily and said that you have to get the valuations done independently insofar as the insolvency process is concerned. I want to also point out, as you are aware, under the SARFAESI Act, every time an asset is brought to sale, the valuation should not be more than 6 months. Unfortunately, in the CIRP process and the liquidation process, the timeline between the starting and commencement of the process and the valuation which is conducted with respect to the commencement dates of these processes and the date of the sale of the assets or resolution plans are sometimes very different from each other. And events of the nature of COVID, that has sort of a pandemic, which has in fact shaken up the entire economic system around the world, also can happen. There are events of this nature which have happened in the past, which will happen, the Black Swan events. So there must be a mechanism and a robust mechanism of valuations which must be taken close to the time frame of the liquidation of the assets so that we are able to have a pragmatic view. Please appreciate that a liquidator is ultimately an officer of the court. He is acting in the interest of the secured creditors. He has a great responsibility. Of course, now that committee has been framed, creditors committee, and they are also sitting and taking views, which are of course not binding on the liquidator. But I have seen that most liquidators are taking that view of the committee very much in mind before selling the assets or liquidating the assets. So combination of these factors, according to me, is such that we have to get the valuations done very close to the date on which the sale is done. And the valuations have to be so pragmatic that the decision-making process of an independent professional like a liquidator is not put to question, because he acts in a bona fide manner in the best interest of the stakeholders, and he should not be put on the cross, so to speak, for having not taken the correct decision if the valuation is not such that will invite and encourage people to participate and bid for the assets.
So thank you, Alok ji, actually. So,
welcome, Anju, call me Alok.
So there are two things which I would like to touch upon once again what you have said, and there are very two interesting aspects of what we are discussing here now. One is that you touched upon that as a liquidation. So as in the Companies Act also we had liquidation. So liquidation as a concept was not an alien concept to the financial creditors, I would say. So I would little bit, like to add here, an insolvency per se or the restructuring under the, CIRP format was sort of a little alien concept. In fact, so when we used to say that there is a stigma about insolvency, am I audible?
Yes, yes.
So there was a little bit stigma attached to these, CIRP process, whereas there was not much stigma attached to the liquidation term per se. So FCs also little were comfortable taking decisions, because once the company goes into liquidation, there is not much comes on themselves as a decision maker. Whereas in the CIRP, a lot of is on stake with regard to their role as well. So maybe one aspect which I was, wanting to add on to. And secondly, you talked about like valuations. So definitely in the liquidation, there are few assets when the company goes into liquidation, automatically they are taken away. Whereas that has not been, kind of, I would say, taken up in the liquidation value. Say, for example, if a factory is on a leasehold land, which I had touched upon with you guys when we had a session. So what happens when the company goes into CIRP? It still can fetch a good value because the land also comes with the plant and machinery and land and building. But when it goes to the liquidation, automatically, if it is not going under as a going concern, then that land does not hold any value. So drastically the valuation goes down. So that was one aspect. Maybe like our lawyers can also later on throw some light on this. I would like to have their contribution as well. Next question I would like to ask to Atul ji. To keep a corporate as a going concern is another challenge during liquidation and more so during pandemic. So please share your views, Atul ji.
See, let's look at the transformation of an RP to a liquidator. So it is not that one fine morning a liquidation order is passed, and let us assume a situation that the RP is now nominated as a liquidator. Now it is not that the whole world has changed. He is supposed to run the corporate debtor for a certain period, and he has to address issues like operations, he has to address issues like workmen, he has to address issues like insurances, he has to address issues like compliances. So for a large part of the period of even the liquidation process, he's supposed to function more or less like an RP. Now, when it comes to the sale of the assets, and if, as the code mandates, that the sale of the asset should be substantially, in the first preference rather, as a going concern. So going concern is in a way an anathema to the whole concept of liquidation, because liquidation necessarily means that you're selling off the company and you're not kind of, whereas a sale as a going concern is more akin to a restructuring and ensuring that you find a buyer whom you can. So therefore, what is very important is that the liquidator must understand the nuances of operations. So that is a big challenge when you want to sell it as a going concern, because you can't strip the company of the assets, and because you're not in the situation where you can strip the assets of the company and sell the assets piecemeal. The second aspect is that, when it comes to treatment of certain assets, I'll give you an illustration, a very interesting illustration. What is the treatment of the transactions which have been carried out fraudulently, and the assets which are underlying those transactions, which could come back into the company as a result of 66 proceedings? Now, what do you do for the purpose of the valuation? Now, I am facing a situation like this in one of my matters. And because if you look at the genesis of IBC, the genesis of IBC was essentially, if you ask me, was not restructuring. It was the state of the financial sector which forced the government to come out with it. Because if you look at the regime prior to IBC, it is not that. And if you look at Swiss ribbons also, very clearly the Supreme Court says that at any stage, now the question there of course was whether you can do the restructuring during the liquidation phase as well. Now, if you look at the scheme earlier also 391, 393 and 394 of the Companies Act was still available for the purpose of restructuring even after the liquidity binding up order had been passed. So the regime was available, but it was just that the triggers were completely changed. And this has been put into two silos. One is the CIRP process and the other is the liquidation process. Now, when you are going in for a going concern, you obviously have to do a lot of maintenance of the assets. And there comes the mismatch again, as Alok was pointing out, between the valuation and the timing of the sale. Now, after the amendment, now it's 2 years, which is the period for completion of the liquidation process. And 2 years is a long period, and considering the pandemic that we have had, there's bound to be a lot of difference in the valuations and how the people will look at the asset as a going concern. So valuations is a major issue. What you take into account for the purpose of those valuations, whether it's any amounts which are recoverable under Section 66, because I understand there is a dichotomy of views. So for us, how you treat those amounts which are going to come through the 66 proceedings into the company, should they go to the lenders, or should they be part of the valuation, or should they be part of the liquidation estate? Now, this is one. In fact, the committee formed by IBBI had given an opinion that it is up to the NCLT, whereas the banking committee had said that it should be as per the intercreditor arrangement between the lenders. So these are dichotomous views, and of course the fundamental problem is to find a buyer as a going concern. And once you find a buyer, what is the valuation? Are those valuations realistic for the purpose? Now, of course, there's this usual acquisition of the promoters coming in, and of course that's another very significant aspect. If you look at the whole process of liquidation, a big problem is with Mr. Chandiok sitting there, I can take the liberty of saying that is the interference of the NCLT and the NCLT during the entire process itself. Now, for every damn thing which happens, there is an application filed, and the liquidator's hands are supposed to fight the whole battle of selling it as a going concern with his hands tied behind his back. Now, I'm faced with a situation where the NCLT has stayed the whole process of liquidation on an application of the promoters. Now, these are practical problems, and if we really want to be serious about it, this kind of interference should in fact be curtailed. And going concern is something which is ideal, but going concern, as I said, is an anathema to liquidation itself. And therefore it is, to my mind, going concern is something, unless it is a charade which is put up by the promoters and somebody finds, you're lucky to find a buyer, is something which is not going to happen so easily.
Thank you, sir, for your views. I will just sum up 2-3 things also I would like to take up here of what you said about. Yes, definitely. One was your thing that 66, like any assets or any, kind of amount which has been locked into 66 or may come back in the corporate debtor. So I think our view as RPs or something like that under CIRP, it should be, so actually this money or this asset is something which has been gone from the corporate debtor. So it should come back to the corporate debtor itself, one. And if it is coming back to the corporate debtor and the corporate debtor is in liquidation, so definitely it should be given to the creditors, or some way out should be there. I think in that case, maybe COC, because generally when any avoidable transaction, application for avoidable transactions has been filed by the RP or anything like that, or under 66, so COC is well aware of that, I think. And why not they take a view at the time of, when they are taking this decision, or if they are not finding any resolution plan, COC, take up that matter as well and decide something about that as well. So, yeah, to my limited understanding and knowledge, I think it should be.
Sanju, I can add something on this.
Yes, sir.
So what we do and what we understand from the law, the simple reading of the law, that whenever there is any contribution under Section 66, it is very clearly written in the law that it will go to corporate debtor.
Corporate debtor, exactly.
So, and secondly, even if the company is under liquidation, then going to the corporate debtor means it will be part of the liquidation estate. In fact, Section 36, which is the liquidation estate, has got a special clause which says that any amount recovered under Section 43, 45, 50, or 66 would be the part of the liquidation estate. So there is no confusion about it.
Yes.
Now, the first confusion, which is during the CIRP period, in case there is an application under Section 66 and also the resolution plan is being approved. Now, the COC members mostly say that the amount which is being offered under the resolution plan does not have any kind of the amount recoverable under avoidable transactions has not been factored in. has not been factored in by the RA. So the COC says that why the RA should get undue enrichment once something is recovered under these avoidable transactions.
Yes.
So in most of the resolution plans that we have got approved from COC, we have a standard clause that any amount recovered under the avoidable transactions would be distributed to the creditors in the same ratio as the present ratio of the resolution plan is. So that is presently working very well practically, and it should not go to RA. Of course, the word written is the corporate debtor, but through the resolution plans, we are in fact changing it. I just wanted to add this. Please, you can go ahead with the other questions.
So I think in between these two things, whether it goes to the RA or the corporate debtor, it is, I think, more of a nomenclature, I would say, rather. And obviously it can be pre-decided, because generally by the time a resolution plan comes and is getting approved, till then RP has already done that transaction analysis and is in the position of, or has already filed the avoidable application. So I think, yeah, COC may take a view and can ask RA to change that particular clause or like that. So definitely.
See, not only this. See, like at most of the cases, the resolution plan is approved today. The CIRP cost is concluded today, and see later on the RA is taking over the company, and who would look into who would follow up the transactions application, which might even go over 6 months or even 1 year after the resolution plan is approved.
Yes.
So that part is also being taken care of in the resolution plan, that who will meet the cost and how the cost will be funded. And finally, when the amount, in case there is then how the amount will be distributed. That is also being handled through the resolution plan only, or through a separate resolution in the COC meeting.
Yeah, so you very correctly said, and I would add on to that CIRP, it's possible that the RP or the person who would be, heading the monitoring agency or something like that can, counter in these factors. But in the liquidation case, and these applications actually sometimes go to years and years, in the courts. So in case of liquidation, and if the company is going on the going concern kind of a thing, most of the employees or the workmen has already been, terminated or things like that. And even if the liquidator is ex officio now, so what happens to then? So we do not have or foreseen that part of it. If any money is coming back to the corporate debtor when the corporate debtor is already not there, maybe after liquidating the assets. Though I would hope that that doesn't happen, but that can also.
I don't think it will happen, Anju. In case there is any transaction application pending.
So
in case there is
all in courts.
No, in case there is any transaction application pending, I don't think any company can be dissolved, and no dissolution order can be passed by NCLT when the transactions applications are still pending. That would not happen.
Yeah, so I hopefully see that.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, sir. So my next question would be to Sunil ji. Have liquidation costs gone up due to the pandemic? One aspect, and then one that the period is being excluded, and plus there are further delays for want of the right investors. So if I put it simply, Sunilji, because of this excluding part, and in the CIRPs also, and in the liquidations, although the cases or the processes are still going on, so one already there was a less money in the corporate debtor, or sometimes the CIRP or the liquidation is financed by the financial creditors themselves, and having this period excluded from the processes has added up to the problem actually. So your views, sir.
Yes, thank you, Anju. This is an important question, because this is something that is impacting a lot of people in terms of how to deal with it.
Yeah.
Now, you're right. There is also a time cost of money, and if the process is getting extended, there's a time cost that is coming with that. There are also issues that are coming in relating to what is the time value of the asset itself, which has been valued, and whether now it should be put on some kind of a separate evaluation matrix to be able to determine what its current price should be for the purpose of carrying out the excise.
Yeah.
It's a fact that, in the current situation, it becomes very difficult for going ahead with a detailed valuation exercise. Where you have, let us say, financial assets, it's still workable. But where you have physical assets distributed over a large part of the country, as happens with many of the larger companies, this becomes a challenge. And then going there, verifying and getting market data on what this value should be is also a very, very difficult thing. So I think, this is going to be something that we will have to work out some solutions for. And going forward, as I see it, it's going to be more of a market determined approach that is going to come up as we see more of these liquidations, if they actually start maturing in the next few months, because then we'll be able to capture the impact of this particular delay that has taken place in how the valuations are being worked out. One of the factors that is also creating problems in terms of valuation, as I get it from our resolution professionals, is in terms of actually the physical part of it also. Now, many of these, when there was a lockdown, were locked out of their offices. They were not being able to access offices. They were not even able to keep a control in terms of the submission of reports, in terms of the MIS that they were generating, and in being able to follow up on that. So there have been some instances that have come to our notice where there have been pilferages, where there has been removal of stocks, there has been something that has happened which was slightly untoward, but I think unavoidable under the circumstances, because even the security staff that they had was not fully deployed, was not completely available. And there are these kind of issues that we will be seeing as we go forward. Some of the other problems that we have been seeing is where, there have been stocks of finished goods which have not been moved out of the factory premises because the markets are not there. The logistics line, the chain has collapsed. There has been no way, as I was talking to somebody in June, where he had an export order almost ready and completed around end of March, which he was able to finish by June, but he was unable to ship out. And then finally, the person at the other end, the buyer, was unable to buy. He was in a more desperate financial strait than perhaps this gentleman was. So there are these kind of problems that are coming up in terms of liquidation. Let me put it also in another way, which is that the objective of the IBC is, really speaking, maximizing the economic value, the value to the economy. And that is why, the first step has always been a resolution of the stress rather than a liquidation or a recovery. And that is where it has distinguished itself from the earlier approaches that were there at, say, as your CIR, this thing, CDA, and your stressed asset, SDRs, and all these resolution plans that you had. So there was that difference where the primary focus there was in trying to see what could be recovered. There's also a lack of cohesion between sometimes the views that the COC itself has in terms of how to proceed with a certain objective. In the recent approach that the Reserve Bank of India has been taking, they've been talking about an intercreditor agreement. Now, if there could be something like an intercreditor agreement even worked out for the COC, perhaps it may help in a more focused operation of the COC itself. There would also be certain stipulations there, because this is another problem that comes up from the RPs, which is in terms of saying that there is no code of conduct for the COC. And therefore, the COC sometimes tends to be arbitrary in the decisions that it takes and is not accountable for any kind of certain lapses that may be there in its entire decision-making process, including delays. So these are things that need to be built in. In fact, using this forum, I would suggest that at the end of it, if you can get feedback from the participants about what are the changes that could be brought into IBC, it would be a nice paper that you could submit to IBC at the end of all this, which they may find valuable. I'm not saying they will, but they may, and therefore it will be at least opening up a door for certain discussions. Now, coming back to the area that we were talking about, you had asked me to talk about the liquidation factor. Yes, to that extent, liquidation is getting more expensive because of the valuations, number one, and number two, of the processes that need to be gone through. Number three, in terms of delays at even the court level, in terms of getting any kind of resolutions worked out, where people may have filed cases against the entities that are involved, and therefore they need to be resolved before a resolution is worked out, or a liquidation can be taken forward. So that factor is also there. And I was talking to Mr. Chandok a couple of minutes before this session started, and we were wondering about what is the process that the Supreme Court is now looking at in terms of having physical hearings to be able to expedite processes. NCLT, of course, as we all know, and NCLT are on a video-based process, but I am not sure how good or how effective that has been. Perhaps 60 to 80% as effective as the earlier process was, but maybe it still leaves a discount factor of 20 to 30%. So these are factors that will need to be seen in terms of the procedural areas that will have an impact upon the valuations, which will have an impact upon the realizations coming out of liquidations, in being able to actually segregate items, being able to sell them online in a virtual mode without people perhaps being able to go and check out for themselves what exactly that asset means. And that would be more so, particularly where you are looking at the piecemeal kind of sale. So if you are just doing that kind of a sale, that becomes more difficult. So I think that's what I would like to say. I think this is going to be challenging both for people who are practicing in this particular field and for people who are making rules and regulations for them to follow. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Vasantji, I would like to ask you, there are many issues arise related to determining the claims, or rather crystallizing the claim. So actually, liquidator is not only on a kind of verifying or collating the claims, he's sort of adjudicating upon the claims as well, because he has now have to finalize the claims. So a lot of litigations come on them, and priorities under section 53, issues related to section 52, where if the FCs are not relinquishing, want to realize their assets, and then courts are not able to function normally. So how do you deal with all these issues like related to NCLT, NCLAT, and Supreme Court and things like that? Your views, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Anju. Good evening, everyone. And before answering the question, it's very relevant to throw some data and facts, which I think most of the panelists and attendees are aware of it. Having said that, it is very important to put things in perspective to understand how things will unfold in the COVID times. As you would have read in the recent report by Economic Times and other survey, our economy has contracted 1/4 in the first quarter. 1/4 is such a huge contraction. And with respect to broadly, the manufacturing sector contracted by almost 40.7%. And services sector by 35%. The only hope is the agriculture sector, which shown a growth of 4%. So plus we can see various reports with respect to the loss of jobs, MSMEs, getting into difficult times and all this stuff. Just straight away start with the example of the power sector, the stressed power assets. For the past 1.5 years, how the government has dealt with the stressed power assets, in addition to what Alok and Atul and Sunil said about it, and of course Anil has elaborated everything. So with respect to the stressed power assets, because which is very interesting to see how the stressed power assets have been dealt in the past, and how which it is coming back to the liquidation again, because as Alok rightly said, we still look at liquidation as a stigma, and we need to look at in a very pragmatic things, and we need to look at the financial creditors in a very robustic and in a fair and just manner, not immediately to get into the liquidation, because that mindset has to come out of the larger financial creditors to deal with the scheme of IBC things. With respect to the stressed power assets, it is very clear that out of 34 power stressed assets in the coal sector, 14 of the 34 identified sectors have sort of in the last 1.5 years have come out, and they sort of proper resolution plan has been implemented, and it amounts to almost 17,000 megawatt capacity, which are under the various stages of resolution, which many panelists are aware of. The total outstanding debt of 34 stressed power plant as of now is to the tune of 1.9 lakh crore. Because I've just taken an example of power sector. See, the most resolved projects in the past 1.5 years out of 34, 14 has been resolved. And even they are also facing liquidation because of debt servicing issue, inadequate cash generation, etc. So, because keeping in mind all the things which are going to unfold, the Government of India, Ministry of Finance, as well as the Prime Minister's office has taken a lot of steps. Though I'm not, we are yet to see how it is unfolded and how the package is getting implemented. But the major 4 steps are, as everyone is aware, threshold of 1 crore from 1 lakh has been increased, and suspension of CARP process. Third is, exclusion of COVID-19 related dead from the definition of default. These are the things which has been broad steps have been taken to avoid going further into liquidation or people triggering IBC proceedings. So now coming to the fact of 52 and 53, before that, let's speak about what the NCLT and NCLAT has been saying so far. Because as everyone knows, so far only the virtual conference, video conferencing hearing has been happening. Since Mr. Chandyok is here, I take liberty in adding to what he said in the beginning of the session. Even the Supreme Court is sort of trying to have 3 physical courtrooms with a lot of social distancing. I don't know how is it going to be implemented. But having said that, the NCLT and NCLAT 22nd March 2020 notification is the operating notification, which sort of clarified that the approval of resolution plans and liquidation proceedings will not be and shall not be treated as urgent matters. So as everyone know, urgent matters are only being dealt by NCLT and NCLAT. But since liquidation and resolution plans, approval of resolution plan is not treated as urgent matters, so it is very difficult to get a hearing on these matters unless and until we find some creative solution to it. So I'll come to that immediately, because that NCLT Ahmedabad has entertained one petition, and I will deal with it a little later. But we need to find a creative solution to sort of find within that 22nd March 2020 notification to sort of seek the court's intervention. As Mr. Goyal said, and so Sunilji also said that a lot of intervention is required because a lot of application has been filed. And Atul also said about, everyone is filing application, and that sort of intervention is not there. So therefore, 52 and 53 is yet to trigger in this stage, but we have to see how it is going to sort of get implemented in that. With respect to the 52, there is no change as such in how section 52 and 53 will apply in view of my foregoing statements. NCLT may still direct, as and when it opens, a corporate debtor to be liquidated on the 3 conditions which everyone know. No resolution plan is received or the resolution plan is rejected by NCLT. The second one is the COC by not less than 66% decides to liquidate the corporate debtor prior to approval of a resolution plan. The third is resolution plan approved by NCLT is contravened by corporate debtor, and so on. And with respect to the distribution priority also will remain the same. But we need to keep in mind the kind of economy, the kind of things we are going through right now. We need to look at things in a very pragmatic way, and because as told by every panelist, there is erosion of valuation of underlying assets. So this has to be kept in mind while invoking 52 and 53. And we can always interpret the JP decision in a manner which we can ask the NCLT or NCLAT to relook at the way the resolution plans are going to be modified, keeping in mind the erosion of the valuation. The decision which I spoke about was in relation to NCLT Ahmedabad decision of the Sunil Kumar Agarwal versus Digjam Limited matter, where which NCLT allowed the resolution applicant to modify a plan which was already approved by the COC due to COVID. But because it's a very first step which we need to recognize the fact that NCLT Ahmedabad recognize the fact that the resolution plan approved by the COC can be taken back to the COC for modification. But having said that, the modification, the order clearly says the modification is only with respect to the timeline for payment to the financial and operational creditors and other stakeholders, only with respect to the timeline. As you know, there's already a suspension of various sections in the IBC. Plus, also there is a regulation 47A also being suspended due to the COVID situation. So I'm not saying this is an exhaustive step, but this is a first step in the right direction by NCLT in the COVID times, recognizing the COVID issue and asking the resolution plan to be amended to sort of defer the payment, so that your erosion of value and other issues can be dealt with in a pragmatic way. So that is the way we are looking at it right now. And having said that, Supreme Court has sort of indicated that it will open up the physical court hearing in a pilot basis. And High Court of Delhi, as Mr. Chandyok is here and Mr. Atul Sharma is here, they are very well aware that the High Court is also sort of indicated to the bar that they also will like to open up from September 1st in a limited rotational way, not in a full-fledged way. But I think that's the right direction in with the unprecedented situation, the unprecedented times. Having said that, we need to keep in mind all these things before sort of looking at Section 52 and 53 with respect to the secured creditor and liquidation proceedings, because we need to look at it to secure the asset or secure the financial creditor's right, keeping in mind the valuation which is going to happen, keeping in mind the erosion of value, as well as sort of give sort of room to achieve the scheme and object in which IBC was enacted. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So definitely there are issues relating to obviously courts, and of course we all RPs are having that. Many applications have been filed for approving of the resolution plan, liquidation applications have been filed, and there is no hearing happening. And in fact, we have done the urgent hearing also. Then also the next date is like after 1.5 or 2 months. I'm getting that's what after the urgent hearing done. So this is the real situation, and I don't know how long, because it's already been 5 months. Where, say for example, if one of my applications was filed in February sometime, and March it was supposed to be listed, the first listing was to happen in the later March, and it could not happen because of the lockdown, and till now it has not been listed, and even after urgent hearing it has not been listed now. So definitely,
even NCLAT is having a lot of vacancy. The chairman, we have an acting chairman, we don't have a full-time chairman. NCLT also has a lot of vacancies. We have a lot of
RAs are also finding very difficult the time. One is that whatever money they had, kind of the corpus they have collected or giving in the resolutions plan, that money is stuck, plus their PBGs and everything, they're getting expired. They have to again, kind of get them renewed or things like that. So these are the practical issues which RAs are, dealing with right now as per the plans are concerned. So we are actually running short of time, but I really have to take up 2-3 very urgent issues which we are dealing with as liquidators. So these 2 issues, and anybody can contribute into that. One is about the home buyers in the liquidation scenario, how the home buyers have to be treated. And especially, I would like to give a scenario, and I would invite the panelists, whosoever can contribute on that. So the basic problem is happening in the home buyers case. Say for example, the project is kind of secured to the lenders, and lenders have asked to realize their security interest under Section 52, and in that particular project there are home buyers also. So the general, if we go by the law, nowhere it has been said that the home buyers are a secured financial creditors. So how and what liquidator is supposed to do pertaining to these claims when the FCs or the secured FCs are asking for realization of the assets under 52, and there are units which are being sold to the home buyers, means sort of, and they are sort of allottees or whatever you can call it. So CIRP, we are very clear about their situation. Supreme Court has many times held that the home buyers or allottees would be given their homes, and then only FCs can realize their amount, whatever assets are left in the company. But in the liquidation case, I would like to invite the panelists, whosoever can contribute on that.
Anju, if I may say so, it's a very, very interesting issue that you've raised, and particularly since a very large number of cases relating to home buyers are there.
It is a recent development where home buyer cases have gone into liquidation, so we don't have much precedence to this.
I think the issue can be looked at in a much simpler way. The charge on the asset, as you are aware, is permitted by the bankers. The financial institutions give loan on the strength of the land and the development that is being done, and they permit charge to be created or lien to be created with respect to the home buyers who are purchasing the assets, who in turn may have taken the funds from additional bankers.
Yeah. So the
when under Section 52, they say that we don't want to relinquish and charge, and we want the asset to be sold. Then the asset, the land that they have, the mortgaged asset, will be sold along with all the encumbrances and the charges which are created by the home buyers who have physically taken loan on the specific assets. So it is not that because their right is not going away. They are financial creditors as well. They in turn have created charges because they have taken loans from other home finance companies and bankers. So the asset will be sold along with the encumbrances of the home buyers and the obligations with respect to completion of the project. And that is the only way one can look at it. Otherwise, there will be complete chaos in the system.
Yeah, exactly. So,
No, while I agree with Alokji
yeah.
that the situation would ultimately emerge like this. However, in liquidation, one aspect is also very clear that whenever a liquidator sell an asset, that asset is sold free from all encumbrances. That's very clear. But you see, when a liquid, because all the encumbrances, all the very clear and clean, and asset doesn't go along with any liens or any charges because everything has to stay with the liquidator.
Correct.
While I agree with Alokji, because see, this is kind of a third-party interest has already been created in a property, and a third party has also taken loan from another banker. So that scenario. However, this scenario, the other side of the law would argue that the liquidator will always sell assets without any encumbrances, and encumbrances will be handled by the liquidator. So I think Alokji can also supplement to what I'm saying, while I agree with Alokji.
Yeah, just one thing, Alokji, if you can address to that as well. So when you call them secured financial creditors, there are only three categories in which the code kind of envisages the secured financial creditors, which is the charge should be registered with either ROC, CERSAI or IU. So in the home buyer's case, nowhere the charge is being created in their favor. So they do not, and even in the tri-party agreements of the loan and everything, no charge as such is registered in these three authorities. So how would you, conclude that the home buyers actually have interested a third party interest, which Anilji has said? Yeah, Alokji.
Maybe it's maybe an issue of internet.
Yeah.
I think it is it shows that Alokji has left, so he may be rejoining again.
Yeah.
So what exactly you said, Anju, is the scenario is what exactly the question was? Like, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so I was saying in the home buyer's case where the liquidation has been ordered of the corporate debtor, so there are home buyers in a project and that project is charged to a
Okay. No, I could recall, because see, you are talking about the regulation. I think regulation 31 or 21, which says the how to verify the security interest.
Yes.
So the security interest, because see, the word used there in that regulation is may, that the liquidator may verify the security interest either because a charge registered on ROC, CERSAI or the IU. So the word may, in fact, has been interpreted in such a manner that this definition is not exclusive. This is inclusive definition. So once it is an inclusive definition, there are many other documents which can come under and can be used for verification of security interest. So these three are just illustrations, and there can be many other. In fact, I have admitted various claims where the hypothecation, mortgage deeds, agreements, and the company, the corporate debtor had been accepting that yes, there is a charge that I had created. However, the ROC charge was not created, the CERSAI was not created. So I have accepted as secured creditor. See, on the other hand, I have also kind of the two litigations are going on where I have considered home buyers as a secured creditors. Two litigations that we are fighting, because see, what I understand that this is the definition of security interest used in section 3, I think 31. That section 331, the security interest definition is different from the security interest definition which was used in SARFAESI or which was used in the Recovery of Debts and Bankruptcy Act 1998. So these definitions are clearly different, because in this definition under the IBC, there are two additional words. One, the claim, the word claim has also been added. And the other is the right of specific performance. So right of specific performance is what we normally have when we are a home buyer. We get a builder buyer agreement, which is an agreement to sell, which gives a right of specific performance. And the other word which has been added in the definition of security interest is the claim. The earlier word used to be pledge, hypothecation, but there is another word that the claim on the property. So the home buyer definitely have a claim on the property, and that particular claim on the property will give him the right of specific performance. So when these two additional words are used as compared to the earlier definition of security interest, and these two words are specifically used in the IBC, so that is the reason that we have considered in one of the latest case, we have considered home buyers as the secured creditors, knowing fully that what Alokji is saying, that the lien of the home buyer will go to the will ultimately go to the buyer. Anyone who buys the properties under liquidation will also kind of inherit the lien of the home buyers. That is a little bit of a challenge, whether that would be accepted or not. Although I agree with Alokji that it should go. It is something which is an attachment to the asset that should go along with that. Yes,
so
yes.
Both yours and Alokji's views, can I conclude to, so if a project is, partly sold and partly, kind of the whole project was though mortgaged to a secured creditor. So in that sense, secured creditor has to give whatever sold units are there, has to give the same home buyers. If any residual money is left with them, obviously he can recover that money after completing of the project, and rest of the inventory he can sold as the liquidation process. So can I conclude to that?
Very fair approach to take, and that is, as Anilji has also been saying, I think both of us are broadly on the same, that is the only practical way to resolve this under section 52 and 53. And in fact, the interest of the home buyers is a very, very important interest to be looked at. And in fact, the critical issue is that they have come into this asset after the NOC from the financial creditor itself. So the financial creditor cannot first give the NOC, get an encumbrance and a claim created on it, and then expect that the liquidator will now sell the asset free of that claim or encumbrance which they themselves have permitted to be created.
Correct. So Alokji, another question leading to this only, and then I will be ending our discussion, is that about the liquidator's fees, which Atulji had also raised the issue about the liquidator's fees. So there are two questions pertaining to that. One is, once the liquidation fees is not being decided or disapproved by the COC while they were deciding to or taking the decision of liquidating the corporate debtor because of there was no resolution plan approved. So one is that, and second is, as part of, if say for example, whatever we have concluded in section 52 or 53 in realization of assets, so if the home buyers have been given their homes, so would that be a deemed realization on part of liquidator to, if the fees has to go by the chart of regulation 4 of liquidations, so then the liquidator is entitled to a fees as a deemed realization of the assets. So I think that discussion we had, that whether the assets are realized under section 52 or 53, financial creditors has to proportionately contribute towards the residual CIRP cost and the liquidation cost, which includes the liquidator's fees as well. So I want your views on that. If, a liquidator has to give the, say for example, allottees their homes and rest of the assets have been sold by FCs under 52. So what will be the liquidator's fees in that case as per the chart? Yeah.
It's a very, very interesting and very complex question.
I know. I have been dealing it for a long time, and that's why I needed some expert views on this. I have been dealing with it for a long time.
Is hardly going to be forthcoming, but let me try to do the impossible.
Please,
what is still impossible. See, basically, insofar as the liquidation fees is concerned, as you are aware, earlier there was the chart, if the COC, and now of course there is an amendment. At the stage when the liquidation is being recommended, the COC will determine the mechanism and the fee. And particularly in the case of a home buyer, in the current situation, if the liquidation happens in terms of the decision of the COC with respect to the liquidation costs and the liquidator's fee, this aspect will certainly be brought to bear. So the person who's, whether it is the RP or a new liquidator is being appointed, he will certainly ask this question and ask it to be resolved so that the matter can be taken up. However, we are looking at cases in the past where there is no determination of the liquidator's fee at the point of time when the case has gone into liquidation. As you are aware, the fees is divided into two parts. One is obviously the sale of the asset, and the second is the distribution part of the asset. It's at two stages. Now, where in section 52 and 53, where a person is standing outside the liquidation process and he's selling the asset and recovering the money on his own, and is only responsible for payment of the differential, which in any case we all know is always negligible. It's always never there. If a financial creditor steps out and says, I want to sell the asset and then dispose it off, only thing is the pro rata amount of the liquidation cost he has to bear. But insofar as the liquidation fees is concerned, there is no liquidation fees which will be attracted in case an asset is liquidated by the financial creditor himself under Section 52. The second aspect is that if you are saying that there is a cost element involved with respect to the amount that is to be assumed or deemed on account of the home buyer's rights, because here we are talking in terms of specific performance of the home buyer's right. Now, according to me, the specific performance of the home buyer's right and the value which is attributable to that or deemed to be attributable to will not fall within the ambit of the liquidator's fee. May not be a great thing for liquidators like you and Anil to hear, but this is a perspective which certainly will hold sway, because if the financial creditor sells the asset, he will not want to pay the fees. The home buyer is in any case doing a specific performance. In fact, as we discussed, it is possible that the asset will be sold along with that lien, the right of, I may say, of the home buyers of specific performance. And as he has rightly pointed out, the amendment, which also now made it clear that these people will be entitled to specific performance. So in either of these two cases, the value of liquidation fee will not be determined on the basis of those deemed amounts. And in any case, then who will pay? If you say that each of the home buyers must pay a part of the fees, it is almost impossible. It is financial creditors who are going to get the value for the sale of the land with whatever, call them encumbrances, call them liens, call them specific performance rights, will certainly not be deemed to increase the value of the sale of the asset, and also will not fall under the distribution chart, is my humble view. And I think, I mean, Anil may perhaps have some more experience of having tried such an asset in this.
No, I think, Atul, what you are saying is right, but the only thing that I would like to add, see, in case of liquidation, there are two scenarios. One scenario is that the project as such is sold to another builder, and the builder will construct and will decide what to do. So whatever builder will give, and that would be considered as realization, and how the same would be distributed to the creditors, that would be considered as distribution, and the liquidators would be due as per regulation 4 of the liquidation process. So the second scenario, which is more complex, this scenario is very simple, that in the liquidation, the liquidator has sold the project to another builder. So the second scenario is that if the liquidation as a going concern scenario is working out, the home buyers are ready to pay the balance amount, and the liquidator makes an endeavor to complete the construction, maybe partly, and hand over the flats to the home buyer. Now, in this case, I would assume that there are two parts. As you rightly said, there are two parts. One on the sale of the asset, realization of the sale proceeds, and the second is distribution. Although in this case, when the liquidator, when the amount is recovered from the home buyer for the purpose of construction, that is considered to be amount realized. Because whenever we talk about amount realized, that is either from the sale of assets or from the realizations from the sundry debtors. So any amount realized from the home buyer is considered to be realization. And when we construct and then hand over the asset to a creditor. So what I'm trying to say is that even if I hand over an asset or I distribute the fund, it is one and the same thing. The liquidator will claim its fee even if the asset is allocated to a creditor rather than the fund, rather than the sale proceeds. The liquidator would actually claim its distribution fee. So when the money is recovered from the home buyer for the purpose of construction, this is considered to be realization, and it is very well covered under the realization, which is claiming the fee of the liquidator. And when the flat is given to the home buyer, that is considered as distribution. This is my humble opinion about it.
So I think I also have the same view, even if you read the 21A regulation, which clearly says if the financial creditors are realizing under 52 as well, then also they have to give as per 53(1)AB the total cost. So residual CIRP cost and the liquidation cost, which includes the liquidator's fees. So liquidation cost is the lump sum of the whole cost, including the liquidator's fees. So that's what my humble view is, that liquidator is entitled to that part of the fees. In fact, in the resolution plan also, any debt which is being settled, so that is being considered as the amount of the resolution plan, I would say. So to any of the creditors. So if the resolution plan is to be treated like that, so any debt settled in the plan to be considered as an amount of the resolution plan, same should be in the liquidation as well. So any claim or any debt has been settled by the liquidator, by whatever, by kind of allotting the home to the home buyer, or FCs realizing their security interest, is a realization, deemed realization by the liquidator. So it should be taken that way. But anyways, if it is being contravened, we'll have to go to NCLTs and they will only give their final opinion about that. So thank you so much, all the panelists, for having a wonderful discussion. I think Aditi is there on the online, or I only need to see the questions. What is the, I will just read out the questions. If we have already answered, that's fine. Otherwise, we'll take them up. What is the difference between winding up under Companies Act done under Section 271, wherein shareholders pass special resolution to wound up the company, and voluntary liquidation under IBC? There is a little bit difference. Would somebody like to take this up? Maybe our lawyers, Atulji or Vasanji, can take this up.
Is there Section 271 still exists in 2013 after the IBC? I doubt that the Section 2, because I think there is no other option available now under the Companies Act for any liquidation or any winding up. The only option is now under IBC, which is either voluntary or post CIRP. So there is no third option, and the third option is only lying with the NCLT when the dispute is not resolved. When the dispute is not resolved between the management, then the NCLT can order liquidation. So these are the only three options available as of now for any kind of liquidation. So the winding up option is not available now under the law.
Okay, thank you, sir. Next question is, please ask Vasantji, difference between winding up by shareholders passing special resolution under companies. I think it's the same question, and winding up rules with voluntary liquidation under IBC. So I think the answer would be same, that 271 now does not hold any ground, and any liquidation application has to go through the IBC only. Correct, sir? Yeah. Then next question is, under Section 53 of the court, whether the secured creditors will get the amount irrespective of the security interest, or to the extent of the security interest only as a secured financial creditor. Anilji, would you like to answer?
I think the scenario is not really very clear as far as Section 53 is concerned. However, I raised a question long back, and the IBBI raised this question to the Insolvency Law Committee. Insolvency Law Committee, in their report in March 2018, attended this issue very well in detail. And the paragraph number 21.1 to paragraph number 21.6 deals with this particular process aspect. And it is very clearly interpreted that there is no amendment required in Section 53 or any other regulation. And it is said that the value of the security interest and the priority would be considered while distributing the proceeds by the liquidator. Later on, the similar view was taken under section, when the amendment was done under in subsection 4 of Section 30, where the word was used that in the resolution plan, the amount available would be allocated to the creditors considering their priority and the value of security interest. So in the resolution plan as well as in the liquidation process, for example, if I have a car loan, and the car is having a market value of 15 lakhs of rupees, and the outstanding is 15 lakhs. So the car lender, the person who has the hypothecation of car, will get 15 lakhs. On the other hand, if somebody is given 200 crores and the total working capital and the total recoveries from the current assets is only 3 crore, so the person who actually had a claim of 200 will get 3 crores only. So in case we don't do that, that probably will disturb the credit market and would disturb the economy. This principle that your recovery would be equivalent to the security interest, that is a very, very old principle. So that cannot be changed overnight. And most of the people have given loan in this manner only.
Yeah, and I think courts have already decided about the priorities of charges as well. So first charge holder gets the first priority to, I think, get the money, and then only the residuals only go to the second and third charge holder, like that. So even if the court, the act says about the pari passu charges, but then first charge or second charge holders are, getting in that order only.
Anju, there is another aspect which was being discussed, and NCL 80 level, that the secured creditor should actually mean only to the extent of the value of security interest, and the rest of the loan should be considered as unsecured and should stand along with the unsecured financial credit. That was also a concept going on.
Okay. Yeah. That's interesting to know. Next question is, could you please ask Vasant ji, under bracket preferably, or any other panelist, the difference between winding up under the companies is the same question, winding up rules by shareholders. So I think this has been a very problematic issue for shareholders, I think. Sir, in case the sole FC does not want to relinquish their rights, what would be the role of the liquidator? So I think then he will be selling in under 53. Sir, please, can you add? In case the sole FC does not want to relinquish their rights, what would be the role of the liquidator?
It will be sold outside the liquidation process.
Yeah. So under 52, basically.
52, that's right.
So this example will lead to a situation that even the liquidator will get the fee if there is only one asset, and that asset is also not relinquished. So the liquidator will get even the fee, the liquidator's fee on that part also while relinquishing. Otherwise, the liquidation process itself will be considered as the liquidator will not get any fee, and how the dissolution of the company will happen.
Yes, thank you. Would the option of winding up under just and equitable cause be available under Companies Act, since that provision has been omitted yet? So anybody?
No, I don't think so. That is out of the window in any case.
See, according to me, Atulji, I believe just and equitable could be a cause, because all cases are not necessarily going into liquidation for default in terms of the provisions of 7, 9, and 10.
Mm-hmm.
There could be certain assets where the invocation of the jurisdiction of just and equitable will be required. It could also be required in cases where the company or corporate entities is not suffering from financial distress. So the just and equitable clause is a very, very broad clause, and it will encompass everything. In fact, let me just say sovereignty of the country is another aspect which is there. Or if there is something which is being done, or a company is being, the affairs of the company are being conducted in a manner which is prejudicial to public interest, the courts can take cognizance of this. So I think just and equitable clause will remain. The question very rightly is that it may be invoked in very, very rare circumstances. But I can certainly assume, and I think Chandyok Saab can perhaps also throw more light as to what would be the just and equitable. I mean, I've said one issue, but it could be conducting manners. Let us say somebody is running a Ponzi scheme in a company. There is no default. There is no financial distress. But if the Ponzi scheme is discovered, or some other structures are being done, money laundering issues are being conducted through the company, it may be just and equitable for the company. Atulji, Chandyok Saab, I would love to hear your views.
No, I do not think, Alok, that in any case the other provisions of the Companies Act have been given a go by. We have brought in IBC for a particular purpose, and the purpose was we have just taken away that provision from the old Companies Act where we said is unable to pay its debt, and we brought that into IBC to see for the first time that a resolution should be attempted, so that if the same asset can be utilized after 29A has been brought in to be utilized by somebody else for a larger public interest. Though so far, you all are more experienced on these issues than me, personally, but my own view is that IBC has done wonders. There is no doubt about it. It has done something which is unparalleled in the history of any legislation in this country. Right from the time as Mr. Vishwanathan gave the report till date, I think we have done a great job. Right? All stakeholders have played their role. People thought there will be no RPs. We have done wonders so far as RPs are concerned. People thought that probably IBC will never pick it up like Securitization Act or DRT Act and all that. But I think we've done wonders. But accept the fact that because the financial creditor has been at the helm of the affairs, financial creditor is only looking at me. that we the people, which is in the Constitution of India, is still not brought into IBC. I think time has come that when the financial creditor must look at we means the total corporate, as a total corporate going concern, includes its own stakeholders, not only financial creditors. But however, take the case of a operation and mismanagement. I still feel the Companies Act would be available to a court if it finds that it's not able to run it. You see this new, whether it may not be relevant, but with these Chinese companies that have come up today, where all these kinds of Hawala transactions are going on, obviously court can't invoke IBC into it. Court will have to invoke its extraordinary jurisdiction to wind it up, or the government will have to use that force to do that. Therefore, to say that all other provisions will become redundant, I do not think so. In the circumstances where you are coming to court still saying operation and mismanagement, and the court is not able to manage it, or there's no settlement between them, and court is not able to sell that asset, the court will ultimately have to wind it up, that company. There's no other choice. Therefore, to say that all other provisions become redundant would not be possible to my mind. The situation is that ever since IBC came, we have put everything on the hold. In fact, we see from our experience that IBC cases were taken up first. Companies Act cases used to be all adjourned mostly, till we got IBC, and now jurisdictions, separate benches got it, and then Companies Act started looking at it. Therefore, time is there. There was shortage of infrastructure. There's still shortage of infrastructure. And I always keep saying, whenever you want to bring a legislation, bring infrastructure first. Because if you don't have infrastructure, look at nobody thought of COVID-19. And look at the infrastructure that we need today. Everything is run. I was asked by everybody that whether physical hearing will start or not. There's no problem on physical hearing as such. The difficulty is the courts are all closed. There's no window, there's nothing absolutely. And you can't work without air conditioning. And how will you stop a litigant to attend to that hearing of his? And supposing there are 20 cases listed in one court, we have not been able to get that system in place so far in any court for that matter, even in the Supreme Court, that we have said this is listed at 11 o'clock, it will be done at 11 o'clock, time is in fact, you see, I'm only giving back from experience. In London, for example, there are 4 cases listed in a commercial court. Now, if the court is taking more time in first 2 matters or first matter or second matter, third and fourth is transferred to some other judge immediately on the same day, which can't happen in this country because of our circumstances are different. Our courts are having 40, 50 matters a day. We can't think in transferring to somebody else and doing those matters. So we have to take that hard reality into our consideration. The situation is today that in liquidation has taken, I think that's the time now that liquidation will now get more priority in the NCLTs and adjudicating authority than the first part, because the main resolution process, those 12 cases being over, now you're getting, and law has been laid down. Many creases have been ironed out, amendments have been made. Now actually it's the liquidation that is causing us more problem to see that. Yeah. But I think what Alok's pointed out that, and I think Anil also pointed out that if the first charge creator to the corporate debtor itself gave a no objection to the allottee, that he would be the one and identifies that property, not only gives no objection, he says flat number 221 will be belonging to Mr. A, and Mr. A is entitled to charge that flat to another commercial institution, then to my mind, it has already given up its charge to that extent in favor of the allottee or the favor of that person. So I don't think that main corporate debtor, unless of course, as Anil rightly said, if the going concern is taken by another builder, he completes it, that's a different scenario altogether. That's simpler actually speaking. But if tower 1 is already through and tower 2 and 3 has to be done, then this separate scenario comes, because then they'll have all ancillary, what we call land appurtenant to it, development of that land appurtenant will come in. All those questions will come, but I'm sure with the ability that we have of Atul, Alok, Anil, Anju and everybody, and with the guidance of Mr. Shekhar and Mr. Pandit here, I'm sure we'll be able to resolve these issues. I have no doubt about it. I think NCLT did not get, without deserving it, the best jurisdiction in 2018 in the world. And I think we should look forward to it. We must continue to assist ourselves and assist the court in bringing resolution. And I think the time has come that we as lawyers will have to change our attitudes. And I've said that in a lot of times during this 5 months, that if I as a lawyer feel that out of 5 questions, 3 can be resolved between me and the other side, I must offer that into the court. That's the responsibility that I owe to the society, I owe to the court. And let the remaining 2 be decided, be adjudicated upon, whether it's arbitration, whether it's insolvency. Now, all those situations that we are going on. And I thought somebody said that, Anju, I think, pointed out that there have been no hearing with respect to any cases with respect to resolution plans being passed. But my experience is to the contrary. At least I have 5 matters with me where appeals are pending, where resolution plans have been passed during COVID-19 only. Yeah. So it's not that the court has not functioned. It has not functioned to the extent it should have functioned.
I agree.
I agree with you. It should have functioned better. But COVID is not, it's not a human-made situation. Nobody knew why God is angry with every caste, color, and religion. At least he's making no difference in, he's not violating Article 14. He treats everybody, whether you are in America, you are in India, you are anywhere else. Whether China brought it or not brought it is a different question. I'm not going into academics of that. But the fact of the matter is, it's an unprecedented time. And I think the Indian judiciary, wherever we are, in whichever forum we are, with the help of whatever resources we have, I think we have done a very commendable job. We must find a time has come when you must look at how good you are, Anju, rather than my looking at how many bad points you have. I think that's where we need to look at forward. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we have some more questions. What am I supposed to do? Like, should we take those questions or it's already?
I think they can send those questions to the Insol Secretariat. We'll address it to the public, to the panelists, whosoever, if they direct it to a particular person, and we'll send them the reply. There's no problem.
Okay. So with that, I would like to conclude.
No, you can still ask 1 or 2 questions, but I'm saying if the questions are too many, that's what I'm saying.
No, Anju, I would just like to react to Alok's point of just and equitable. Yes. See, the issue that we are discussing is liquidation. And when we are discussing liquidation, we're discussing liquidation in the context of IBC, not in an operation and mismanagement situation. So obviously, So obviously, if it is a question of operation and mismanagement, just and equitable would be a major, big consideration with the court for, ordering winding up.
Okay. I think I recall a very, very recent order by Justice M.M. Kumar. While this was a case of O&M, operations and mismanagement, and when there was no conclusion, then the dispute was not resolvable, then Justice M.M. Kumar ordered for the liquidation of the company. And in that particular case, Justice A.K. Sikri, after post-retirement, was appointed as liquidator. And that's one very, very live example. This is the third scenario where the companies can be subject to liquidation. 1, voluntary. 2nd, post-CIRP. And 3rd, when a dispute is not resolved, then NCLT can also order the company for liquidation. But that's under Companies Act, whereas the other 2 are under IBC.
You're right.
So then there is one question. When do you obtain approval under 25N and 250 of Industrial Disputes Act for retrenchment of employees, workmen, and closure of business in case of liquidation? So,
no, liquidation, like Anju, it is not required. If a company goes into liquidation, it is automatically a discharge of the employees, unless you want to retain some people for the purpose of management of the liquidation process or for the purpose of keeping the company as a going concern.
Then with due respect, Mr. Anil's answer on difference between winding up and liquidation seems to be incorrect. Winding up rules came into force on 1st April 2020. I think so he has misspelled it. I think rules he wanted to say only. So anything about that, sir?
No, I have no information, no knowledge. I'm not keeping a track of any rules which is on 1st of April 2020 under the Companies Act, and that too for winding up. I'm not keeping a track of it. I'm sorry, if there is any.
So as a liquidator, if I want to purchase insurance policy, what policy would be best suited? Okay. Oh, okay. Fine. So it's a commercial question. Yeah. And also, since liquidation exceeds 1 year, do I need to keep renewing the policy, or can I get one insurance policy for entire liquidation? So I think, again, it's a very commercial or market-driven thing. And how are home buyers under liquidation protected? So I think we have already answered this. There are only two I would quickly see if we have to add on something. Sir, I would like to see clarification from Mr. Anil Goyal with respect to liquidators fee as per regulation 2A under the condition of section 52, where right is not relinquished to the liquidator. Thank you. I think we have answered that quite elaborately. We do not have any, as of now, any judicial precedent to this, but definitely, because in the matter of CIRP, most of the matters have already been, kind of taken care by the courts. But in the liquidation cases, these are new issues which are coming up, and they have to be settled by the courts ultimately. And then the last one is, do we expect more information utilities to be set up to allow centralization of information in the near future? That can be a real tool for public as well as investors. So I think that would be a question to be asked to the government.
Out of syllabus.
Yeah.
That is out of syllabus.
Yeah. So I think that's been the thing. It's been a very interesting discussion with all the panelists, and maybe we had some insights and some doubts which we had as per the. Obviously, I could not take up the all questions, so I had some few questions. But I would like to sum up this session into two things. One is definitely the liquidation values or the values of the assets are going down, and it is a double mark on the financial creditors, especially on the secured creditors, in terms of liquidation values or the values of the assets are going down. One, and two, in the delays of the liquidation and the CIRP process, they have to contribute more towards the cost for the process. So that is one thing. And secondly, definitely, we are also, getting less investment towards the stress assets. Already, our markets for stress assets are not very developed. And in fact, much of the financial institutions couldn't do about much for stress assets financing. And this pandemic would result into even less investment towards the distress assets. So this is my limited view. Chandyok sir, I would like to conclude the session, and then maybe we can take this off. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Anju. Thank you, each one of the panelists. I think we've covered everything in liquidation. In fact, we have covered something very ancillary, as Atul pointed out, that with respect to operation and mismanagement, nothing to do with liquidation under the IBC is right, absolutely, on that part. And I think we have covered that part. Thank you so much, each one of you. I think the time has come where I feel though the times of pandemic has brought less people as a resolution applicants, there's no doubt about it. But I'm sure if the valuations are correct, and it has to be market driven, it can't be done anywhere else. There's nothing else into it. If market today, a particular thing, but unfortunately during COVID, we have seen 5,644 injection was being sold for 30,000 rupees. So where are those values coming from? But I'm just giving you an example with respect to that in a country like ours, we will have to be more realistic. We'll have to bring integrity into our systems, not people only. The system must get integrated. Our institution must get strong now. I have no hesitation in accepting in this August gathering that our institutions are going down. We need to bring them up. In fact, I think day before yesterday, Mr. Iqbal Chagla, writing in Indian Express, says, ADM Jabalpur has come back. I think yes. And we all must remember Justice Khanna's, those words, which it took 41 years for the Supreme Court to actually recognize those words and adopt that minority view of Justice H.R. Khanna. Time has come when we as people of this country, as I said, we need to rise up to the occasion. We need to look at things which will be in a common interest to bring economy up, because ultimately we have to also look at those who are not able to get anything out of it. We don't want to create a resolution by which we create other operational creditors or other people connected with it, or even the employees, as a question was put to us, what about the retrenchment? And Anil rightly responded to that also. The question today is, these circumstances is a new normal. In the new normal, how will you react? How liquidation must react, how liquidator must react, how the investor must react is a question that we must pose to ourselves wherever we are. And if all stakeholders will join hands, hold each other's hand, do something collective, And of course, adjudicating authority is there to guide us, would tell us how to go about it. The Supreme Court has done wonders so far as IBC is concerned. I don't think in the history of Supreme Court, in 3.5 months or 4 months, you have got judgments coming from in the IBC. But yes, there are new questions arising every day because circumstances change. And we are probably, I think we don't take into consideration from Delhi, if I go to Noida and go to Meerut, everything changes. Language changes, color of clothes changes, food changes, habits change. I go to Chandigarh, the situation changes. I go to the other side, the situation changes. So this country has a lot of heritage, lot of culture, lot of diversity, which is our strong food. That's the foundation of this country. And consequently, we must relish all that. I, on behalf of INSOL India, thank you all participants. Wish you all and your families best of your times to come. Pray together to Almighty that if we have done anything wrong, forgive us all so that this COVID goes away. Those warriors who are working at our front, safeguarding us, may God bless them. Those who are looking at our otherwise borders, God bless them. But we as insolvency professionals also are warriors in one sense. God bless us also, so that we bring more resolutions to the otherwise deepened economy and maybe bring more light to the darkness that we have. Thank you very much, all of you. And personally indebted to all of you for your participation.